Hello, Little Justice Leaders. I'm Shelby. I'm the creator of Little Justice Leaders, and we help parents, teachers, educators, and caregivers talk to kids about topics of social justice. And I'm so excited to bring you a really interesting conversation today about the topic of labor and specifically child labor. So we're going to be speaking with Deepa Kylasam Iyer, and Deepa is an expert on global issues of labor and with a specialization in bonded child labor. So Deepa is doing her PhD at the Department of Global Labor and Work in Cornell's ILR school and is a project coordinator with the Labor Action Tracker. She was born and raised in Southern India and is a first-generation college student. She also has her Master's of Philosophy and Development Studies and her Master's of Public Policy. So welcome, Deepa. Thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Thank you, Shelby. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So can you start by introducing yourself to our community and a little bit about your background and you?
So, as Shelby has helpfully and kindly introduced, I am a researcher. I'm currently doing my PhD at Cornell's ILR school. It's called Industrial and Labor Relations School. And I look at how technology changes workplace and how workers respond to them. So that's what is the focus of my research. I also am a project coordinator with the Labor Action Tracker. It is a database in the United States that comprehensively gathers data on strikes and protests. So that is one hat that I wear, that of the researcher. I also wear the hat of an artist in a way. So I write poetry and I also paint. That's another way in which I respond to the world.
I love that. I love that you kind of share your genius in so many different formats. So I'm curious what brought you to study and care so deeply about global issues of labor and as well as, bonded child labor in particular.
Yeah. So this has something to do with my personal history as well. I grew up in southern India, and growing up in India and in South Asia, um, labor issues were front and center as you went about your life. You could not separate work from the rest of things that you were doing. You should remember that India is about 84 to 85% informal as an economy, which means work also comes in the form of fluid labor conditions. And in that, child labor or children working as they went to school or children dropping out and working was very common and very visible. So even as I was going to school, I knew that other kids in my neighborhood couldn't. And in some ways, I always responded to it by being a tutor to them or sharing what I was learning. As I grew a little older, I was volunteering with civil society organizations that were intervening on behalf of children who couldn't be in school full time, helping them with food, nutrition, and bridge literacy programs. So I was actively involved in that. And then as an adult, when I got job and work, I also was able to support it a little bit financially. So at many levels and for in a sustained manner, I have been engaged with issues of children and work because of the cultural background and the society that I lived in. I've also, at the uni, I took international development, so I was able to engage with it intellectually. And later at work, I was a research officer with South Asia Alliance for Poverty Eradication, where I was able to see this issue upfront in many cultural contexts, social contexts in India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and later in East Africa, the way in which poverty intersects with the other aspects of work. So that's a little bit about how I came into research aspect of it, but it definitely was motivated by my personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a beautiful story, I think, of how sometimes our experiences can inform and often do inform what we end up doing and the research and the work that we do in the world. So thank you for sharing that helpful background. So, given your expertise on this area and all the work that you're doing, I'm curious what you think some of the most important issues of global labor are for us to be concerned about right now, in your opinion, or, the things you're most interested and curious about right now.
Yeah, that's really a great question, and it's a question I ponder about almost on a daily basis. What are the things that matter to me at work? In terms of global issues, I can easily pinpoint three off the top of my head because it's so visible and it is around us all the time. One is how technology is reshaping work. So as we know, more and more people are having non-standard forms of employment, even in the global north, in the countries like the United States. There are jobs to be had, but it's not going to be your typical 9 to 5 job with healthcare and pension benefits. And that's a huge change. The other thing is every couple of years, technology is changing the way we do work. That means there's a lot of upskilling to be done, and most of it is upon us. We have to educate ourselves and make ourselves worthy of selection in the labor market. That's a huge pressure. It's a cultural change about how we understand work. So I'll put that technology work angle on the top of the list. The other being climate change. Definitely, we cannot ignore how much the earth is warming. There are flood conditions that are predicted in very near future, like as near as 2030. And it's going to affect both global north and the global south equally, and we're all linked. So as part of this database project that I'm doing, Labor Action Tracker, we've been seeing increasing cases of, during summer months, workers in fast food restaurants and others demanding workplace safety issues like, having an air conditioner or, the workplace getting really heated up and so on. So this is going to be more frequent. So we have to seriously think systematically about workplace safety issues and the well-being of workers as they go about work more formally, informally, and interrelationally. So that's going to come up. And so these are the two systemic issues. And the third one I'm going to flag off is because in the last couple of months, we have been grappling with conflict all across the world in different capacities, often in intense situation. And we must take a moment to remember that it's really hard for the people who are in that region. And since we are talking about children, particularly children, because they have been the intense, receiving end of what war can be, and it impacts their childhood and also their adulthood in ways that we cannot imagine. It's going to be very intense. It's going to take a long time to confront and overcome what war does to them. So I just want to take a moment to remember that as an issue that is there at the background all the time, at least in the recent past.
Absolutely. That's so important. And I really appreciate that you brought up so many varying issues. So, like technology, climate change, and of course, international conflict. So I was going to ask, so that leads perfectly into my question about intersectionality and how does labor connect to other issues of justice? And how is it and why is it so important to think of it as a global issue?
Really a pertinent question. First of all, when you don the hat of a worker, the identity of a worker, it comes as a package. You cannot separate all the other identities that you have in terms of gender, class, nationality, citizenship, and so on and so forth. So it always comes as like a composite identity, and you cannot separate the strands of who you are at work. And that is the way you perceive yourself as a worker. That is definitely the way institutions perceive you as a worker. So even though both of us might be doing the same kind of work, we might have different rights and responsibilities at work. And that is a contradiction that is at play in our everyday lives all the time. I'll give you an example. There are some kinds of work in our society. Let's take the case of United States. Home care work or janitorial work. It's done by people of a specific class. Technically, anybody can do it who applies for the job. But systematically, we see that particular groups of people are more engaged in it than otherwise. So this brings the question, why? And then we look at historic specificities and policy choices that led particular groups of people into particular kinds of occupations and jobs and the implications that that have for us. So that's intersectionality in a nutshell. Global is also very much apparent in the way we go about seeing how work is visible. So for example, in the United States, we usually don't see any more call center kind of jobs done by Americans. Like if you have a customer relations issue, you ring up, somebody in another part of the world is going to pick up that call and talk to you perfectly and be able to resolve that for you. So these also bring up the question of why are some jobs not here? And when they disappeared here, why did they appear elsewhere? So the whole global supply chain, outsourcing, everything. So we see work as a global piece where different subcomponents are present within national borders. So in that way, labor is very much a global issue.
Absolutely. So you're giving us so much to think about. So I really appreciate kind of all the different topics you're touching on, because I think it's just, especially for folks who are kind of new to this issue or just starting to learn a little bit more about labor, gives you kind of a very complex view of what it is, because that's what it is. It really is very complicated. So something you and I have been talking a lot about, and we've been talking a bit about on this call, is bonded child labor. So, and you wrote a great article about that, which I was able to read. For those who don't know, what is bonded child labor?
Yeah. So before I answer that question directly, I want to take you through a related concept of forced labor. That's because that's the larger umbrella under which bonded labor and bonded child labor make sense. So international organizations like ILO, International Labor Organizations, under their conventions have defined forced labor for us. It is any type of work or an activity that is extractive, that has a threat of penalty, which involves people who have not consented to do that job. So it has three elements really. It involves some kind of work in terms of activity. It involves some kind of threat of penalty. It also involves involuntariness. And that is the three pieces that make up what it means to do forced labor. And you can easily think of many experiences where something is legal, but at the same time it's coercive, making people to work in terms of working conditions or terms of contract that they really wouldn't agree on voluntarily. And so that's the larger umbrella under which we are working on. Debt bondage or bonded labor specifically means giving work to pay off loan or debt. And this is systematically instituted in many parts of the world in terms of a relationship that you can pay off your debt by choosing to work for them. The trouble is that there is no like legal law that regulates this kind of a relationship, much less a contract. So that means you never know how long you have to work till your debt is paid. So there is a power relation that is involved here. And when you kind of juxtapose other kind of social inequities like intersectionality that we said, if a woman is put in that situation of being bonded, if a child is put in that position, then the kind of vulnerabilities only multiply. So that is debt bondage in a nutshell. And particularly bonded child labor means trying to pay off your debt by giving a child's labor as the currency of exchange. So that's an easy way to kind of place bonded child labor within forced labor lexicon that we use in international policy.
That's very helpful background. Thank you, Deepa. Kind of this whole conversation has given really useful background. So at Little Justice Leaders, we're always talking to educators and caregivers and talking about, how do we take these big, scary, complex issues in the world of social justice and bring them to kids. So let's start with, why should caregivers and educators care? Why should they be teaching their kids about issues, labor issues, about child labor? Why is this something we should be talking to kids about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we can all agree safely that the big picture objective of education is to make children into sensitive human beings and responsible citizens. Given those are the values that drive us to teach children the way that we do, I think making things visible, especially the truths about the world visible to them, is really important. And the earlier they can grasp it and adapt to it and respond to it, I think the better chance we have of maybe resolving it in the future. So with all the institutions that we have, child labor should not exist, right? We all agree that that is wrong, and yet it does. So I would encourage all of us to involve the future generation in understanding why, and why is it complex? Why are there no easy solutions and so on? And I'm hoping that children are sensitive and they are great responders, that they would respond in a way in their everyday practices, in their interpersonal relationship, and also as they grow up and make life choices, if they know all these invisible inequities that play out in the world and that they can do something about them. So I think that is my hope when I argue that this is worthy of bringing in a classroom situation and in a learning environment.
That is so beautiful and so in alignment with a lot of the work we do at Little Justice Leaders, just this deep belief that young people have such power to create change and such power to develop empathy and understand these issues from that perspective. So thank you for that that explanation. That was just very well put. And I'm curious if you have any advice for those parents and teachers who want to navigate these conversations about child labor, about labor in general, with young people and kids really from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely. As the issues and topics get tougher, more challenging, it really, we have to think through how we introduce that to our kids. And one of the things that I really thought about was that this is very sensitive and it has the potential to shock children. So, for example, when we introduce a topic saying that there are kids out there in the world who are not able to live lives the way they do, potentially kids can feel either guilty or ashamed. And I think it's important to make sure that they don't. Whilst knowing the realities of the world, to also be able to look at hopeful, positive actions and feelings that they can have. So I think that facilitation might ensure that children receive what they are receiving in one way or the other. And I think parents, teachers, caregivers, and facilitators have a great role in making sure that they are introducing it with sensitivity. That means being prepared for umpteen questions that might follow. That also means being responsive to discomfort in class, maybe to take a break or maybe to introduce it in a way that is more engaging to the students. So I'm thinking not just even direct narration, by using props, by using familiar characters, even beloved characters to tell this very difficult story, and see how children take. I mean, it's going to be, we cannot plan everything in advance. It's still going to be work in progress and we learn as we go. But I still think we can plan it or think through it in a way that is appropriate to the young audience that we are hoping to target.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's really helpful advice, and applies to a lot of issues of justice. You know, it really is be ready for the questions, be ready to admit if you don't know the answer, and you know, jump into the complexity with you know, a willingness to respond to the kids and their needs. As of right now, we know there's a huge lack of resources around these particular conversations. So hopefully Deepa and I will be creating some things that will be helpful for folks. But in the meantime, I think that's really helpful for parents and teachers. Then finally, I want to ask, how can parents and teachers foster a sense of responsibility and active citizenship in young people to start to speak up against unjust labor practices in their own country and around the world?
Yeah, I think we should start with the simple things. For example, bring it to schools, bring it to homes. Those are the first two simple steps. Children spend the most time at schools and homes. So have a conversation at home around dinner, around the family members, where kids already feel safe enough to explore so many things. And the same thing with classroom. Classrooms are great spaces of collective learning. You're moving out of your home specificities into a space where kids unlike you are with you, but you're also tied up with similar values and objectives. So I think these are two great settings where these topics could be introduced. So I would suggest bringing it to classroom, bringing it as part of your reading list, school project. And I think we can also do creative things like visiting school museums and local museums and even like digital archives and so on, as a hobby project. And who knows, the kids might latch onto it more than we would care to admit. And I'd also say creative arts and pursuit, because I usually use art to respond to the world, but also to educate and illustrate to the world things that are very difficult. And art does give us like paintings, poetry, theater, performance. They give us tools to actually speak about unpalatable truths and difficult conversations. And we should not hesitate to use those wonderful tools that we have at our disposal. And finally, I must come to my very favorite way of introducing a tough thing, which is reading a book. As a first generation college goer, reading was a big part of growing up and growing out of my very specific social milieu. I cannot thank enough the adults in my life who introduced books to me. And it was in that at that time an inexpensive, public, collective resource that linked me to others unlike me. And I'm very happy that if some project involving you and me comes that is very close to book or a reading resource, I would be more than happy, because it's a way of giving back. And I must thank you here, because when I saw your resource that you are putting out in the world about labor issues to kids, I was really excited. I'm the kind of an adult who constantly shops books and gifts for kids, because I have about a dozen nephews and nieces, and also friends' kids who are all part of my life. And I must tell you that specific kinds of books that diversify their horizons are not really available at bookstores as much as one would like to think. And so I was really excited when I found your resource, which was a book and some factoids and some fun activities. That's kind of a dream resource. I would gift it to all the kids that I love and who are there in my life. So I'm really hoping that we get to do something like that for this project as well.
I agree. I would love that. So keep an eye out for more information about collaborations coming and more resources coming for these conversations. So thank you so much for your kind words, Deepa. And where can our community find you? Can they find you online and learn more about your work?
Yeah, definitely. I my research work is all on academia as well as ResearchGate under my name, Deepa Kylasam Iyer, and I usually it's very updated. All the publications that I have are out there. I'm also on Twitter with the handle at IMDKI. I post there sporadically. It's a bit of the artistic and the academic, so you'll find a bit more of the personal side on the Twitter page.
Amazing. So we'll go ahead and link those below. Deepa, thank you so much for your time and your insight and wisdom, for sharing everything with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Shelby. I really appreciate it too.